So today I want to share with you my M1 Finance review. I'm going to talk about the pros and the cons, but I also want to share my 8+ months of experience using this platform for my own personal investing. So that way this can help determine for you whether M1 Finance is a good platform or not to be able to use for your investing needs. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I hope you are having a fantastic day. If by any chance this is your first video with us, my name is Dennis, and here on the channel we love talking about ways to save money, make money, and invest money like this. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and let's go ahead and jump into this review. Now, to get started, M1 Finance, in case you don't know, is an online trading platform that allows you to trade free stocks, bonds, and even ETFs. So this is very similar to a robo-advisor where you're kind of doing most of the work yourself and then having the computer kind of help and assist you. Now, M1 Finance is very similar to some of the other more recent online brokerage accounts, similar to Robinhood and Webull, but of course there are some unique differences that we're going to be talking about here today. So let's go ahead and get started with the pricing. Now, pricing on M1 Finance is a really good benefit, and this is because M1 Finance allows you to do free trading. Now, free trading might seem very common in a lot of these newer online trading platforms, but I remember back a couple of years ago when I was paying at $9.95 to be able to do one single trade. So having free trade is definitely a nice benefit. Now you might be wondering, well, how does M1 Finance allow for free trade? Well, they have some other benefits on their platform that they can utilize, such as M1 Borrow or M1 Spend. Plus they do make a spread when it comes to actually buying the shares. So all of that allows you to have free trade, which is a really nice benefit. Although some of the other online trading platforms are doing this as well when it comes to giving you free trade. But just keep in mind that there are still some platforms out there that cost you money to be able to do trades. So just be aware that you are actually getting a good savings when it comes to not having to pay, $4.95, $9.95, whatever cost it is to be able to do a single trade. So next we're going to be talking about buying a fund. Now this is kind of a two-parter here, and the first part is actually the fact that M1 Finance allows you to do fractional shares, which is a really awesome thing. And if you're not too familiar, if you were wanting to buy a share of one company, let's go ahead and say Tesla, because I'm a big fan of Tesla. On most other trading platforms, you're gonna have to spend the full cost of that share to be able to purchase it. Now, if Tesla is trading for $235 on, let's say, Robinhood, you have to spend all $235 plus to be able to buy that share of one Tesla stock. Now on M1 Finance, they allow you to do fractional shares. And what this allows you to do is buy into a company at a much smaller entry point than the full cost of that actual share. Now, of course, this means that you're not going to own a full share of a stock if you're buying small portions. Now, this really does help you get started in actually being able to own a share or shares of a single company, as you can put whatever dollar amount works for you at that time instead of the full amount. Now, for me, as I mentioned, I'm a big fan of Tesla. I wanted to have a portion of the company, so I ended up buying some fractional shares through M1 Finance. So I own about 5% of one share. So super tiny amount, but it is a starting point for me. And I plan on putting more and more money towards this to be able to one day have a full share of Tesla. Now, I know to some of the bigger investors, that might not be ideal or necessary as they want to buy into full shares, but somebody that maybe wants to get started with smaller amounts or doesn't have a lot to put into investments, this is a great strategy to help build your portfolio of funds, as you can get started with as little as like $10 to $15 to even $20 every single month or week, or however works best for you. Now, the second part when it comes to buying a fund is that M1 Finance only allows you to buy and sell once per day. Now, this is totally fine for beginner investors, but intermediate and maybe a little bit more advanced might not prefer this, as they want to be buying individual shares in companies at different times of the day. But for other investors, this is totally fine, as you're usually kind of setting things in place and then having everything kind of go on autopilot. So from my personal experience of utilizing this platform so far, I actually haven't seen this as a big downside for me. I personally just kind of have everything set in place, and when it buys into my funds in one day, that's totally fine. I don't need to go back in and buy multiple times in a single day. So next we're going to be talking about the M1 Finance pie. And no, not the pie that you put in the oven, although I could use a pecan pie right about now. The M1 Finance pie effectively is your overall portfolio split up into all the different funds that you are currently invested in. And this is a really neat feature to really kind of give you an overall view of how your portfolio is split up. Now, you can think of all the individual stocks that you own, or ETFs, or even bonds, as slices into this overall pie. But here's the really cool thing, and I don't want to lose anybody when it comes to how M1 Finance works. but M1 Finance allows you to actually make essentially pies within your overall pie. And what I mean by this, M1 Finance actually allows you to group up different funds, whether they're ETFs, stocks, or those bonds, to be able to put them together in one group into your overall pie. So the really unique thing when it comes to M1 Finance and these multiple groups inside your overall pie, and it allows you to see the performance of that group with those stocks all together. So for example, if you wanted to put a whole bunch of different restaurants into one group, you can see how that restaurant group is doing in comparison to your overall pie, which is a really cool feature. You can sometimes follow the market and the sectors that they have, or you can create your own as well. If you wanted to put a whole bunch of retail stores together and have that as a retail pie, or let's say you create a group of all regional banks, so you can see how just regional banks are doing, and then maybe have a comparison to how big banks are doing and have them in separate groups, but as your overall pie. So that allows you to kind of get a good idea of how different sectors are working if you are into having multiple different types of funds and or different types of stocks. Now, if that was a little much for you, don't worry. M1 Finance allows you to just have everything all in one, just so that way you can keep things super simple. So for me personally, I love this feature. I think it's a fantastic way to really get a good idea on how each group of funds are doing. I personally utilize this all the time. You can actually see it on my weekly videos where I group up all of my stocks in different sectors so I can see how they're performing individually and also as a whole group. So next up, we're gonna talk about the different types of accounts that you have available for M1 Finance. The first one, of course, is going to be your regular taxable investing account. So this is gonna be kind of what I have right now, which allows me to invest, but then of course have to get taxed if I pull money out. Next up, of course, they're gonna have a joint account. So you can actually have somebody join in with you if you have like a spouse or significant other. You can also create a trust account as well as also a retirement account. So the really cool thing about the retirement account, you can actually do a traditional, a Roth, a SEP, or you could even do a rollover from a previous company. So the neat thing is if you have a 401k, you can actually have that rolled over into M1 Finance and have that money investing through whatever funds that you want to through that brokerage account. So getting started on M1 Finance is really easy. If you want to open up a taxable investing account like I did, it's a minimum of $100. And then after that, you can pretty much invest whatever dollar amount works best for you. Although investing $10 at minimum would probably be best, and we'll get a little bit more into that here in just a moment. And if you wanted to open up a retirement account, that one just needs $500 to get started. And then again, you can put whatever amount works best for you when it comes to your investing strategy. So getting money transferred into your M1 Finance account takes about 1 business day. I've never seen it go anything longer than that. Although in comparison to platforms such as Robinhood or even Webull, where they actually give you that money right away and then have that money officially transferred by the next day or a couple of days after. So you get the buying power the day that you want versus having to wait for that money to transfer over. Now, there are limitations on those platforms on how much you'll get as far as instant buying power, but with M1 Finance, it is just that 1 day waiting period to be able to have that money transferred. Now, of course, you can also deposit money for future uses if you wanted to. And again, we'll get into more of that here in just a little bit. All right, so next up is going to be dividends, which is probably one of my favorite words in the English dictionary. And just in case you're not too familiar with dividends, is when you own a share of a company or shares of a company, they sometimes will pay out monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, or once a year for having ownership in that company. And it is pretty awesome, and I'm personally a huge fan of dividends. Now, the way dividends work with M1 Finance is very similar to other platforms. When you have ownership of a company, when they pay out those dividends, you get those dividends based off of the amount of shares that you have. Now, because M1 Finance does do fractional sharing, you might be wondering, well, how does that work if you own portions of a company versus a whole share? So a quick example of this would be, let's say you have a company that gives out 10 cents per share when you have 1 share of a company. And if you have 50% of 1 share, so if you have half of a share, and they pay out their dividend, you would get 5 cents instead of 10 cents into your actual account. And this works in different fractions as well. So if you have a third of the company, you have, 5% like I do with Tesla, if they paid out dividends, you would get that percentage of that 1 share's portion of the dividend, which is honestly really awesome because that will still give you the opportunity to grow your portfolio with those dividends if you want to reinvest them. Now, one downside with getting paid dividends on M1 Finance in comparison to other platforms is if you are set to auto invest, which we'll be talking about here in just the next section, you will have the money that you got from dividends dispersed into your overall account. where some investors might want to reinvest those dividends in the company that paid out those dividends. M1 Finance doesn't really give you that option, which might be a downside to some. But for me, I personally don't mind that. I don't mind all my money just going back into my overall portfolio and getting split through all the different companies that I have available on my pie. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about auto investing next. And this feature is a pretty awesome feature, and a lot of people do like this when it comes to M1 Finance. So auto investing means on M1 Finance, if you have a certain dollar amount, it will automatically invest that money into your portfolio. So if you are getting paid dividends like we were just talking about, and it's over the certain dollar amount, you will automatically have that money reinvested and you don't have to worry about it, which is really neat in case you're busy with other things in your life, you don't have time to look at your portfolio. This will get everything taken care of for you right away so you can buy into more shares of companies as quickly as possible. Now, the auto investing feature is defaulted at $10. You can't unfortunately go any lower than that, but you can go definitely much higher. And that could be a benefit for people who maybe want to hold on to more money onto their account if needed for maybe downturns in the market. And as I mentioned earlier, when you are doing investing for yourself and wanting to put in money, if you put anything less than $10, that money won't get invested until you hit that threshold of $10. So if you put at least a minimum of $10 every time you're investing, all of that money will get put into your overall account. So for me, I personally love this feature. I actually can't wait till I get paid out enough in dividends where it just auto invests that money for me. As of right now, I'm just earning pennies on my actual dividends, but it's a start, and that's the important part when it comes to dividends. Now, earlier we talked about M1 Finance as an overall pie and how you can split it up into different companies and or have different sectors and groups of funds together to create an overall pie. Now, in this pie, you can actually have what they call a target percentage for every single individual company that you have. Now, if you have just a couple ETFs, this will be really easy, but if you have multiple different stocks that you want to buy into, you're going to have to split it all up into different percentages. Let's say you have 4 ETFs that you want to invest in. You can either do 25% for all of them if you wanted to, and that equals out 100% of your overall pie. Or let's say you want 2 of those ETFs to hit over 40% of your overall pie each, and then the other 2, 10% each, and that equals out to, again, 100%. Now, if you have tons of different stocks that you have into or different sectors, that of course is going to play out a little bit differently, as you're going to have to switch out the percentages to be much smaller as you add more and more stocks. If you wanted to see how this kind of works out in real time, you can check out my weekly investing videos, because I'll actually have that broken down on me doing it in real time as I'm constantly adding more companies into my portfolio, and you'll see me adjusting those target percentages. And essentially what that target percentage means is when you invest money into the portfolio, that money will be dispersed based off of those targets. So if you did, let's say $100 and you had 4 stocks at 25% apiece, $25 will go into each one of those stocks. If we had that other example where we did 40 and 40 for the 2 ETFs and then 10 and 10 for the others, it would be $40 and $40 and then $10 and $10, and that's how the $100 would get split. And that would do it in any increment in any dollar amount. As you have those percentages split, that's how that money would go into the actual fund. So talking about target funds, there's also an actual percentage next to those targets, which means M1 Finance will actually tell you, based off of what your target is, where you currently are with that fund or ETF or even group of stocks towards your actual target. So sometimes your actual percentage might be higher, lower, or even right on point when it comes to where you want it to be. And if it's off its target, it can sometimes make the graphs look a little funky. And that usually means that either your fund is above its target or below its target. And one of 2 things will happen. So if you are above your target, that means either the fund is doing really well, or maybe you lowered the target of what you wanted it to be. And if it's lower, maybe that fund or that group of funds were doing pretty poorly, or maybe you switched out the actual percentage based off of what you wanted with that fund. Now, some people don't personally prefer this feature when it comes to the target. I personally like this because it gives me a really good control of how I want my overall portfolio to go. So that way I don't overinvest in one group over another, and it kind of keeps me balanced on how I should diversify my portfolio, because it is always a good idea to diversify your portfolio. Now, as I mentioned, sometimes when your actual percentages are really off from your target, you can get a really funky looking graph. And then there's a button on M1 Finance that's called Rebalance, which allows you to rebalance your overall portfolio. Now, me personally, I'm not a fan of utilizing this feature because it does create a taxable event, and I don't want something like that for myself. So the way the rebalance works on M1 Finance is it will actually sell off the shares of companies that are over their target, and buy into companies that are under their target. But again, this does create taxable events. I either will readjust my targets or I will just let the money kind of flow in every single week until everything readjusts itself, because that will happen if you are patient enough. So earlier we mentioned that M1 Finance is a web and app platform. So that means you can actually log into your account whether you're on desktop or on your phone. So I personally like utilizing the website a little bit more, especially when it comes to creating additional sectors or adding in different funds. But when it comes to just looking at my overall portfolio and seeing how it's performing, I'll usually just go ahead and log in through the app. Now, talking about the website and the app, the user interface is fairly simple in a good way and a bad way. In a good way, it's very simple for a lot of beginner investors or people that are just kind of getting back into investing. But for advanced users, this definitely might have a lack of tools to be able to utilize when it comes to investing. And when it comes to doing research, M1 Finance definitely doesn't have a ton of information on their website for each given individual stock or ETF or even bond. But of course, you can always utilize different websites, which I personally like to do, to get all the different information that I need when making decisions on buying companies or stocks. So I know other platforms have a little bit better user interfaces and even research tools, but again, it just depends on how you like to invest, if you're a simple investor or a beginner investor. But for those intermediate and advanced users, this might be a drawback when it comes to utilizing the platform. So M1 Finance has a section called Expert Pies. And in this section, you can actually choose a pie to really get you started on the right foot. They have pies catered to general investing, planning for retirement, responsible investing, income earners, hedge fund followers, and even just stocks and bonds. And what that really does for you is it really gets you on the right foot of having a pie ready for you to really start getting investing. Now, you can always add or change those pies as you prefer, but that really, again, just gets you on the right foot. So as I mentioned earlier, I've been using M1 Finance for about 8+ months now, and I personally see it as a great platform for so many people to really get started. We talked about how they offer the free trading, which is awesome, the fractional shares, which is a really cool feature, and then the auto investing feature / the pie feature to be able to not only have your money auto invested or reinvested if you're getting paid dividends, but also having the option of creating these sectors so you can actually see how you're performing overall. So of course, some of the disadvantages with M1 Finance is the lack of instant access to your funds when doing transfers, the tools that they have available for the research when you're wanting to buy into new funds, as well as the inability to reinvest the dividends into that company that paid out those dividends. So overall, I believe M1 Finance is a fantastic investing platform for beginner and intermediate investors. And in a world where there are tons of new platforms to be able to invest your money, I think M1 Finance is going to be one that is really going to stick out in the long run when it comes to people really getting started with investing and really being able to have an impact with their financial future. So with all the pros and with all the cons and even my personal experience combined, I would give M1 Finance a 4.5 out of 5 when it comes to an investing platform. So if you want to get started with M1 Finance today, I will have my link in the show notes down below, so that way you can get started with investing and start making an impact for your financial future. Now, that is an affiliate link, which means that does help support this channel and me continuing to make content just like this for you guys. Now, if you want to actually see my personal investing journey, check out my playlist right over here where you can actually see how I'm doing every single week with my M1 Finance portfolio. And if you made it this far into the video, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below, and I'll catch you in the next episode.